Well, welcome back to exercise 2. In this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to take a brief overview of the Silhouette user interface, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the basic rotoscoping tools. Alright, so let's get to it. Probably the easiest way to get into it is actually to start up a project. So over here on the left, we have our project window. So first thing we need to do is we need to import some media. So I'm coming in, import media here, and let's find the media that we're after. So we're going to go with test shapes to begin with. We can take in various types of image sequences, including Cineon DPX. The ones we've got here that are included with the course are for the most part either going to be JPEG or PNG. Generally for video work I work with TIFF files, and for film work it's DPX files. Cool, so when we've imported those in, we get a little look over here and we get some basic information about it. Here I have the name of the item, which is the name of the media, some info about it. So it's 1280 by 720, so 720p, and we've got 76 frames at 24 frames a second. Now this here really is a bit arbitrary because we can change this at any point, and at this stage when we're working with it, it actually doesn't have a big effect on what we're doing anyway. So now we've imported in our media, we need to create a new session. So each piece of media can have multiple sessions attached to it, and a session is just an attempt at the shot. So we'll give our shot a name here, and I'll go test shapes 001, and this is where we start to look at the working format. So the working format here is 720p. It picks that up already from the dimensions of the frames. So we do have most of the standard frame sizes here, including the SD and HD standards. I'm going to change my frames per second back down to 25 frames per second here. So it's made a good guess, not quite right. Start frame, so this is going to be more important when we start to export, and it's going to be the frame number that we start with. So this is generally going to be 1 or 0, though for certain circumstances, certain projects, this might have a special frame number that matches in with the original frame number as well. The bit depth we can go to 8-bit, 16-bit or floating point. We'll look at this in a little bit more in depth in a later exercise, so I'm going to skip over that now. And the same with the available nodes here. So we're going to take a look at what each of these nodes actually do. All of these nodes are different effects and give us different tool sets to work with. For the moment, we're just going to stick with our roto here. I'm going to hit OK, and this will now bring in our footage. And now before I do anything else, I'm going to save my project. It's very important that we get into the habit of saving early and saving often. So I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to be saving the project out for you in the same folder as the footage in the individual exercises, so you can take a look at what we do throughout these times. So this is going to be test shapes 001, and this is a way I like to work. I like to version often, so I'll do save as is quite a lot of the time, especially on more complex shots. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to have an accident where a file gets corrupted, or I want to have a sort of point in time where I know things are going well, and if I mess it up at any certain point afterwards, I can always go back to a previous version of the shot rather than having to start all over again. Now this idea also comes in under our autosave routine, but this is also just a nice way that I like to work. Cool. So now we have our viewer active. We've got a whole load of new things to be looking at over on the left hand side here. We've got all of our tools, which we'll come to as and when we need them. We have our viewing options up here. So at the moment we're looking at the output. We can also turn this to foreground, background, composite or channels. As we start working through our shots, we're going to start flipping between these different ones because each of them have their own advantages about either speed or functionality. So we'll take a look at these as we need to, as we go through. If we take a look at inputs here, this is where we can come in and set our inputs and for our foreground and our background, so we can start to check things out in situ. Again, this is an idea that we'll come back to at a later exercise. Same with update here. At the moment, it's set to drag. This determines when Silhouette Effects is going to be doing the processing. So if we're just doing roto splines, having this set to drag is absolutely fine, because as we drag down here, everything's going to update quite nice and fast. For some of the heftier and heavier effects, things can start slowing down quite substantially if we have this set to drag. So we can then set this to release, and this will only update when we take our finger off the mouse button or off the Wacom pen. Or we can have this set to manual, and then it will only update when we hit the enter on the number pad on the keyboard. So it won't do anything. We can keep looking through, nothing's going to change. As soon as I hit enter on the number pad, everything updates there. But for now, we're going to set this back to drag. Quickly moving on, we have our 1:1, 2:1, 3:1 and 4:1. This is our proxies. So if we're working on large formats, we only need to get sort of rough basic outline sorted out to begin with. We can quickly work at lower proxy levels without using up all of our available RAM. And the little computer screen over here, this lets us play around a bit with the colors on the screen. This is going to be very, very important and very, very useful when we start rotoing other images up, because it lets us bring out a lot of detail that we otherwise wouldn't be able to see. I'll also be taking a look at how you should be careful when you start working with these as well. Carrying on over, we have our zoom. Here, this is going to show us a little zoom window when we start working. We'll come and take a closer look at that later. So moving along here, we have our format masks. This is currently inactive because the resolution we're working at doesn't require a format mask. This is only turned on when we're working with film resolution footage, and it just sort of crops off, or it shows off the areas which are going to be cropped off when we actually go out. So it's a good way of saving a bit of time, so you don't have to roto stuff that's not going to be visible anyway. The next one again along here is turned off. This is our stabilization button here. We'll come to this soon. Overlay and the channels here are some of our best friends. This is going to actually show us our shapes as they go on, or whether we just want to have a look at the sort of mask overlay. And this relates directly to this number here. And this is something we'll be working with time and time again. In actually just a couple of minutes, we'll be starting with that. Same with aspect ratio turning on and off. This won't make a difference here because we're working with square pixels. But if we're working with some standard definition footage, for example, where there's a different non-square pixel aspect ratio, this is where this will come into play. And of course, we have our zoom coming in here as well. First round of keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to keep the keyboard shortcuts short and sweet because there's a lot of them to learn if you really want to, but I'm only going to tell you the essential ones really. So I'm going to do I and O for in and out. I zooms you in, O zooms you out. Pretty simple. F will fit you to screen. So if I pan us around somewhere and hit F, that'll fit me back to the screen and take me nice and centered again. So it's good to have those 4 keyboard shortcuts in your head. Cool, well let's hit F again just to hit this on fit. And I'm going to just press play now, just to take us through our first bit of footage. Now you see I'm going to be using simple shapes for this exercise, just so that we get a handle on what the basic tools are doing. So we can really sort of start to work with those basic tools, so we can work with those in the upcoming exercises a bit better. Cool, all right, so actually let's take a look at our first shape here. We've got a square that stays still for quite a long time and then moves down and starts to warp a little bit, starts to shear off a little bit. Cool, so let's take a look at how we would roto that shape out. So I'm going to hit I just to zoom us in, and then press and hold down the space bar and then click to pan around. Cool, so let's have a look at the tools we have available to us over on the left hand side here. Now the shape tools that we're interested in most are these 5 here. So we have our B-spline. I'll show you, let's have a look at the difference between these. We have our B-spline, we have our X-spline, and we have our Bezier tool. Let's just zoom out to take advantage of that. So we have three very different ways of working, and I've accidentally drawn a smiley face. That was definitely not the intention. Let's take a more in-depth look at these particular tools and see how we can use them, because each of these actually has a time and a place where you might want to use them. Now if we quickly look over here on our object list, we can see that each time we've created a shape, it's being added to our list, and we'll take a look at what all of these other icons do in the near future. So for the time being, I'm just going to shift select them all here and hit delete down here. Cool. Let's take a look at our first one, which is the B-spline. So the B-spline is relatively simple. Let's zoom in again. And I'm just going to click to add my first point, click to add my second point, third and fourth, and let's just close this up here. So we only have the choice of a single click, and the actual shape then is automatically determined for us. Now, once we've completed a shape, we're going to pop back into this reshape tool over here, and this is the tool where we have access to all the individual control points. So you can see for this circle here, or this round smooth object here, we have 4 control points here. Now if I hold down the Alt key, and you'll see the icon change to an arrow with a little circle underneath it, you can see that I can start to change the tension of that single point there, and as I do that, the other points also start to shift up. So our entire shape shifts just by changing the tension on these points here. Now this is a very useful tool for doing organic shapes. Not so easy if we wanted to create a square here. Now we can always right click on any of these points at any time and create either corners, or we can turn this to a regular B-spline. So really take out a lot of that tension. Or we can even center a point here, which puts that point in the direct center between the 2 points that are surrounding it. Again, this is a very useful thing for certain occasions. For example, when we're trying to describe a straight line and we've got one too many points active at any time, but still, it's not the best for describing squares or actually straight objects of any type. I'm just going to leave this lying over here for the time being. Now the next one we have over here is the X-spline tool. And again, if I just click, we have pretty much the same as we had before. So we have a single control point that controls the shape in relation to the other control points. And we control the tension here again by using the Alt click, and we move through the different stages. So we go through the sort of B-spline stage to a corner, and then moving over to a cardinal shape here. And this is again available on the right click. So we have corner, now we have cardinal, B-spline, and center point. Now personally, I prefer to use X-splines over B-splines. I find them slightly more flexible. So given the choice between B-splines and X-splines, it's going to be X-splines that I'll be working with throughout these exercises here. Okay, let's just move that over here somewhere. Now the final one we have here is the Bezier tool. For people who haven't done a lot of rotoscoping before, the Bezier tool is probably the one that they're most familiar with. It consists of a center point and 2 handle points. And we can, if we just click, we can create our sharp corners, and if we click and drag, we can drag out our handles to be more weird and wonderful shapes and sizes. Another thing we can do, I'm just going to hit Apple Z or Control Z to undo a few times. So let's come back and create a new shape again. So another thing we can do is, after we've created our points here, if we hold down the Alt key and drag over, we can change where the handle is going to be pointing. So we break the handle and change where the handle is going to be pointing for the next point. This lets us create a whole wide range of shapes that really would be quite difficult to create with either B-splines or X-splines. So in a lot of circumstances, so especially when we're working with architectural or machinery, those sort of objects, the Bezier spline is very much the go-to tool that we'll be using, because it lets us quite easily create these shapes that we'd have to work a lot harder to get using the other tools. And remember, what's the first golden thread? Do as little work as possible. So that means really thinking about the fewest number of points that you want to create. Okay, then let's move on. I'm going to do the same as I did before and just take our different shapes here and just delete them. And let's take a look at our square here. We also have a couple of other tools down here. We have our square shape and, I should say our rectangular tool and our ellipse tool. And these let us draw out these simple shapes, which are absolutely invaluable. So if I hold down Shift when I'm drawing out the ellipse, I'll get a circle. If I hold down Shift when I'm drawing out the rectangle, I'm going to get a square. Cool, let's get rid of those and let's use our square tool to get the basic shape of our rectangle. So once we've got that going on, let's go over to our object list over here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to call this, actually it's called square 2, but I will just call this square. And at times, especially on complicated shots, we could have a whole list filled with hundreds of different shapes. So we really want to be able to keep a good handle on them. And one of the things I'm going to be showing you is techniques for keeping this list in order. All right. Well, let's take a quick look at this here. Let's have this selected. Now, we've got a square here, but it doesn't have to remain a square. All the square tool is, or the ellipse tool is really just another set of Bezier splines. So if I hold down the Alt key, I can drag these out and drag the individual handles out. You can see there, it's just a very, very useful little Bezier spline that's created in the shape of a square. What this allows us to do is it allows us to quickly reshape what we're doing here. So if I select any of the 2 points here, I can come in. I see I didn't quite hit that properly, so I can come in and just adjust these shapes here. Now I could do it this way, but remember, one of the other golden rules is about trying to move shapes rather than points. And this counts even in this instance, because if I just try and move the points here, if I'm a little bit off here, I could be playing around and not quite getting the shape that I want anyway. So let's just take us back to where we were. So instead of moving the points using the reshape tool, which is what we default back to, we can come in and use the transform tool as well. And this lets us transform, so and scale and rotate and distort our shape as we want to. So if I wanted to scale this, I just come to one of the points here, and I can scale horizontally from this side, vertically, either using the center points at the top and bottom, or I can scale both horizontally and vertically using one of the corner points, and I can scale uniformly again by holding down the Shift key. So the time has come now to take a look at our timeline. Our timeline here obviously lets us scrub through the frames if we move it left to right. It also shows us what nodes we've got active and any objects we have within those nodes. And it also is showing you, our little square here is showing you that we have a keyframe already created on this shape here. Now we automatically get a keyframe whenever we create anything, but you can see it's solid, so it means that it's constant going throughout the entire timeline. So that's cool. So what we want to do is we want to roto this shape out now, but it doesn't move for the first 26 frames. So it only starts moving after here. So if I come in here and just bring this down here, we've got another keyframe added, and we've got our animation already started. So this is a linear animation, and it means that our keyframe is not going to match up with what's going on. So this again harks back to the golden threads that I was talking about, and will, unfortunately for you, continue to talk about throughout this entire training series. And that's about thinking like an animator. So what we want to do is we want to find the points of movement, the important points, the keyframes, which is where the word keyframe comes from. Yeah, so the most important points of the animation, and only animate those by hand and let the computer do the hard work for us. Cool. So here, if I wanted to add another keyframe here, I can just come down, right click onto my shape, add keyframe, and this will give us another matching frame where it's not doing anything. Another technique I could use is to use the arrow keys to hit one down and then one up again, thereby cancelling out the movement but adding a keyframe here. Cool. Now I've put this keyframe in the wrong position, so all I have to do is take the keyframe we already have down here and have that selected, and I can just drag that along. Simple as that. And then it's up to me to find the next keyframe. So let's take a look at the motion. So it goes down and then it keeps going down, but the actual, zoom out a little bit. So it keeps going down, but the actual shape starts to transform a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to take it just before it starts to transform, which is going to be this frame here, which is going to be frame 52. And I can take us here, just bring that over there, and that should now match in quite nicely. Cool. So what do I do now that the frame starts to shear off a little bit here? Well, there's a number of things I could do. I mean, I can get the this into the sort of vaguely the same area, which is going to be about here. But at that point, you might think that we have to go back to our reshape tool and start animating these points again. Not so, thankfully. If we go back to our transform tool here, and if I hold down some of the modifier keys here, we can do different things. So for now, without any modifier held down, I can do transforming, so moving up and down, left and right. If I come to any of the corners here, I can do the scaling as we saw before. But if I come to the corner and hold down either the Apple key or the Control key, I can start to do rotation as well. Now, rotation isn't going to help us out in this case. If I just rotate the other corners here, we're still in the same position of it not quite matching up. So luckily there's one more thing that I can do. If I hold down the Alt key, I can do a distort here. So basically it's the same motion as doing the 4-point corner pin, is to come in and just transform up the corners there. Now this is cool for a square. It's actually even cooler when you start doing it on more complicated shapes. So we're using a combination of repositioning, rescaling, and using the distort here. We can get around pretty much most of the transformations without having to go back to the reshape tool here. And it's much better, and you get a much more consistent result by attempting to do it this way than by immediately going to the reshape tool. Now there are points here. Let's zoom in just a tiny bit here. And let's come back up to our overlays over here. At the moment we've got our overlay turned on. If I turn it off, you can see it takes off the line we have here and our little points here. Our points are very difficult to see, but we'll come back and change that in just a moment. And if we move on here, we can look at the individual channels. So we can look at the individual red channel, green channel, blue channel. And if I click on the top little white bar here, all of my channels turn on. Now the one on the far right here is our alpha channel here, and we've got a couple of different ways of seeing this. We have our little overlay view here, little onion skinning. If I hit it again, we just get our grayscale alpha channel. And I hit it one more time, it turns it off. So it's this one here that's going to be really interesting. And this number here, this 20, this directly relates to the opacity of this shape here. So if I put this up to 80 here, we can see that that is now far more opaque. Of course, let's take this number back down again. So we're stuck at 8, put it at 80. Let's take that back down to 20 and turn our overlays back on. And we'll probably want to adjust this just a little bit. So I can adjust this using the arrow keys. And there's at one point where things start to drift, so things aren't looking fantastic. So once we've got our keyframes in here, it's up to us now to come in. Actually, let's while we're zoomed in, let's just fix that just really quickly. Again, holding down the Alt key just to get that sorted out. Cool. So if we have a look through here now, what we're looking for is the point of the most drift, so the point where it's the most wrong. So you can see it's slightly wrong, slightly wrong, slightly wrong. And here, around about here, it gets as wrong as it's going to get. I think it's actually there. It's as wrong as it's going to get. It doesn't get any more wrong than that, and it just goes back and gets better. So what I want to do now at this point is use this here to set our next keyframe. Now there are other techniques that you see around and about, such as keyframing every 20th frame or every 10th frame or every single frame. Now there might be a time and place for that, but I prefer to actually come in and try and do it this way, which generally ends up working out faster with fewer keyframes. So if you do need to come in and correct something, it's a lot easier to do it when you only have a few keyframes to play around with. It actually also gives a cleaner result, and you've got far less chance of your mats actually starting to chatter away. So that's where they start to bubble and boil and not look realistic. Cool. I should note at this point here that if you're not seeing the overlay turned on in the same way, it could be because you're not viewing the output, you're viewing one of the other channels. So if we have foreground turned on, the overlay is not going to show up. And if we have the composite turned on, then the foreground's not going to show up. It's just going to show us what we're going to be taking out. All right, so let's look at shape number 2. Let's take us back here. Happy with shape number 1 for the time being. Now, shape number 2 is a rounded rectangle. Now, there's a couple of ways of handling this. Again, one of them is using the square and coming in, but in this case, I think I'm just going to use the Bezier tool here. Why Bezier instead of one of the other tools? Well, for this type of shape, I probably find it easier to control the Bezier spline than any of the others. Of course, let's come in and start creating our shape. Now we need to turn overlays back on, of course, otherwise we're not going to be able to do anything. So I'm going to click and drag out. Let's actually zoom in on this a little bit so you can see this a bit better. So I'm going to click and drag up, take us here, takes to the point where it starts to shift over, click, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and point us around about there. So when I come to the other corner here, I've already got a sort of lead in on where things are going to go to. So we don't have to be exceedingly accurate at this moment in time. It just helps us to get there. So we click, Alt drag, lets us break the handle straight away. So we come to close the shape here. We're a little bit closer to where we want to be. So at this point here, we do want the reshape tool because we are trying to deal with the shape itself. Cool. So as I click on a point here, you can see it's quite difficult to see what the points are at the moment because our highlight color is white. We're going to change that in the preferences. So we've got loads of preferences we can come to. As we move through the course, we're going to be looking at more and more of these. For the time being, I'm just going to look at shape here. And we can have a look at selected point color, which at the moment is white. I can just click on this and let's take let's make this black. Our bounding box color as well. Let's turn this to a dark green. Hit apply on that and you can see it update immediately here. Going to hit OK on that. So as I move the handles around, you can see they're still linked together. So what I want to do is, as I move one of the handles here, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I can move these handles individually. So I can just match these up really quickly. The Bezier tool is all a case of practice, and believe me, we'll get enough practice as we go through the coming exercises. Cool. All right, so this will do for now. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's have a look at what is happening with this shape. Turn my channels off so we can just see the foreground here. Turn my overlays off. So we've got our one shape here. So it is transforming. It looks as if actually something is coming in and cutting out part of the shape, which is in fact exactly what's happening here. So we could have come to the most complicated frame here and used the Bezier tool to sort of come in and cut all of this out, and just sort of, actually let's do one of the ways that we could have done it. Turn my overlays back on. So we could have come around here and just, yeah, created our little shape here. Oh, we couldn't have done that. We'd have put that about there and brought it round. And anyway, it's we'd have created this weird and wonderful little shape that would have just described that there. And then when it came to animate it, it would have been a real pain just to remap all of these shapes and areas here. So I think what I'm trying to say is that it's often far better to use multiple simple shapes to create your overall master shape than to come in and use one exceedingly complicated shape. All right, so let's delete my Bezier 2 here. What's Bezier 1? Let's turn the overlays back on and turn the visibility back on these as well. Bezier 1 I can't seem to find, so I'm going to delete that. All right, so this actually brings us back to me naming my list. I'm going to, naming my object here. Actually, let's create a new thing here. So it's going to be shape 2 main. And let's call this shape 1. Try and give them better names for you here. So one of the things we can do to sort of start to make this a little bit easier when we're dealing with multiple shapes is to add groups, so layer groups basically, and we can do that with this button down here. So we click on this and we can come in and we'll call this shape 2 or shape 2, and I can drag my other one in here. This just means that it's if I've got like 30 shapes going in this one layer here, if I click on the minus there, that collapses that entire group in so that I don't have to be fighting with hundreds and hundreds of layers here. Cool, so let's come in and I'm going to work on my most complex frame here. It's always best to do that. And I'm going to create another shape, and this time it's going to be an ellipse, which is going to match in with the ellipse here. Let's guess the approximate size and shape, which is going to be about there. Zoom in just a little bit. And again, instead of using the reshape tool here, I'm going to use the transform tool to scale this into position, because I know it's only my scale here that is absolutely wrong. Cool. Let's get in there. There you go. And let's come over here again to our shape layer and let's give this a proper name. And let's call this 2 circle. All right, let's turn on our mats again. Let's just have a look at this just in the black and white alpha view. So as we're going along here, we actually have a whole load of little icons that we can use to work with to show how these shapes actually either work by themselves or interact with other shapes. So we have opacity turned on here. So this is a good way of turning opacity on and off. Really nice and simple, taking the opacity down from 100 to 0. The next one here is how things blend together. So at the moment, these shapes are adding together. So the two ones here, this is add. I can click on this so we get a black on the top of the white. That is minus. I also have intersect. You can see it's only where these two shapes intersect is going to be masked out. And I can also have the exclude. So it's basically it's only the areas which aren't intersecting that are going to be masked out there. But in this case, we want to use subtract. We can also invert either the clip itself, or we can invert a whole layer if we need to, just using our invert tool here. We have motion blur, which we'll look at a bit later. Then probably most importantly, we have the outline color here. This is a very simple way of just changing the various shape colors here so we can identify them away from each other. We can then also lock and turn off visibility on them as well. At any point, if we see this little one here, this is our notes, we can come in and we can apply a note as to what the shape is actually doing. We can say this is subtracting. So we can give ourselves useful little notes here. Hit apply on that, and then we have a note attached to that. So this is really great if you've got a complex shot and you want to just keep little sort of reminders about what you're doing. Even more important if there are multiple people working on the same shot, if you're handing it over to someone else, just to let them know what bit does what, without them having to sort of sift through hundreds of different layers to figure out what each shape is doing. So a combination of properly naming your object here and leaving good notes will make you a lot of friends. That's for sure. Cool. So let's turn that on there, so we can now see. Let's turn our overlays off, so we can now see what that's doing. And I can animate. Let's turn our overlays back on, and I can animate our ellipse here. So come in. I've got the only thing I want to unlock is our little circle here. So come in. And we know that the shape itself isn't changing, so I can just use the transform. Bring that in there. And actually find where the keyframe is, where it stops, which is going to be there. And I can just drag my original frame there, and that should animate on properly. Now the only thing that happens here is we haven't animated it off. Now again, there are a couple of trains of thought about what to do when a shape leaves the scene or leaves another shape. Some people like to just throw them off into the pasteboard, into the wilderness. This is a fine and okay way of doing things. Unless you're working with motion blur, then it can have some very unintended consequences. Probably the easiest way is just to keyframe the opacity. So we take the opacity up there, add a keyframe there. We can see we've got opacity turning from 0 to 100% now. We can do the same thing here. So what I want to do is before it starts moving, it's come up here, add a keyframe for the position, and as it animates out, find the final frame where I can see it, which is going to be there. Come and let's transform that out. Add a keyframe for the opacity. Well, I can take this. I can take this keyframe here because that's not doing anything, and then come out and then just animate that off. I'll split this up into two parts just so you don't get overloaded with information. In the second part of exercise 2, we're going to start to look at how we transform layers instead of shapes, and how that can really help to speed things up. And we're going to be taking a look at our first piece of video footage as well. But take a break now. That's all coming up in part 2.